Under the ancient arches after the last election, all Parliament's newbies stand, a new generation with a reputation now for independence and strong will. For the Conservatives, however, another narrative's also developed. Their backbenchers, old and new, are disaffected, angry and frustrated. But as one told me, these are the symptoms, not the cause. This is the fact David Cameron, despite his haul of seats, didn't win, and went into a coalition that meant Lib Dems got a haul of seats in the cabinet and ministries. It meant less chance of promotion and policy compromises. Some ask if coalition was the only option. Did the leadership want the top jobs for 5 years without risking the snap election a confidence and supply agreement might have forced? The more the right of the party has felt its values ignored and its people unpreferred, the worse the disconnect has got. And the leadership hasn't helped. The lack of a replacement from the right for Liam Fox, the sudden meteoric rise of Chloe Smith to the Treasury team above others longer serving and better qualified, an obsession with how things look and of keeping an inner circle that is posh and posher, and this week the Whips and number 10's awkward handling of last Monday's EU referendum vote.
And I have to say to Her Majesty's front bench tonight, shame on you.
One rebel told us that he was briefing his minister sat before Prime Minister's questions just behind where the Prime Minister himself would come to sit. He was asked to move to make way for a female colleague because visually and politically it looks better. He angrily complied. All of these things have compounded to build a feeling that the Prime Minister sees his backbenchers as the junior school of which he is head.
There is no, on my part, no bad blood, no rancour, no bitterness. These are valued Conservative colleagues. I understand why people feel strongly and will go forward together and tackle the difficult decisions that the country faces.
Oddly, this actually might happen. Fractious and frustrated they may be, they'll still walk through the lobbies loyally. They just want to be taken a bit more notice of by a leadership they suspect wants to govern as if they don't matter.
Well, we're joined now by Conservative backbenchers Mark Reckless and Julian Lewis, both of whom voted against the party whip on Monday night. Welcome to you both. Thanks very much for coming in. Mark Reckless, coming to you first of all. Do you believe that the government is going to act on repatriating powers as a result of the vote, as a result of the things that we heard from David Cameron this morning, or do you think that they're just hoping this will go away?
Well, I mean, the vote wasn't about repatriation of powers. It was about a referendum, and no one under the age of 54 has had the chance to vote. I promised my constituents a referendum. There were over 100,000 signatures demanding a referendum. Organisations such as the People's Pledge have been campaigning for this. And essentially that's the demand. I mean, I don't know whether they're going to seek to repatriate powers or how that would work.
But that wouldn't interest you?
Well, when you have... I would like to get powers back. I would like us to be an independent country, trading with Europe, but governing ourselves. But at the moment we have negotiating for us in Europe John Cunliffe as the most senior civil servant, and he was the man who signed us up to the EU-wide bailout. So it's difficult to see how we're going to get anything except the managing minister's expectations, splitting the difference. If you want serious repatriation of powers, you need someone who has the confidence of Parliament in there negotiating really trying to bring things back. And the key point is any repatriation of powers, any new treaty, had to be put to a referendum so that the British people decide.
Where do you think the debate is on repatriation of powers? Do you think that is satisfactory?
I think it's largely a red herring. I think we've moved beyond that, and we've got to a stage now where the people of the United Kingdom want to have their say. What's significant is that Nick Clegg talks about a smash and grab raid on Brussels, as if we're grabbing something back that's rightfully theirs and shouldn't be rightfully ours. The reality is that they don't want a referendum because the time isn't right, and the time is never right when you think you're going to lose a referendum.
Nick Clegg also accuses you of economic suicide, and the talk of repatriating powers is a dangerous distraction.
Yes, well, I'm interested to see that those of us who said back in 1997, when the party establishment was dithering whether we would even keep the pound or not, that it would be dangerously unstable to adopt the single currency. Those of us who were denounced then as extreme and eccentric, and that now been proven totally correct, are still being denounced as extreme and eccentric by the real extremists, who are people like the Liberal Democrats and, shall we say, the Liberal Conservatives, who won't stand up to them.
you don't describe yourself as a liberal conservative?
No, I'm a conservative. I wanted to be a liberal, I'd have joined the Liberal Democrat Party. And if the country had wanted the Liberals to be having as much influence as they have got, they'd have voted for them in rather larger numbers.
David Cameron calls himself a liberal conservative.
I would describe myself as a conservative, but I also have liberal inclinations. I wouldn't shy away from that. But I come from this as an economist. I was previously UK economist for Warburg's for some time. In fact, say in the early 90s, people looked as if it was a great economic advantage to be in Europe, and we've now seen that isn't the case.
What about the other thing that has been very interesting to watch? That the government delighted not to be part of the euro, but pushing closer economic integration for those in the eurozone. Is that the right thing to do to save the euro?
No, it's an entirely wrong thing to do, because what we argued back in 1997 was that if you have economic unity, you're going to end up with an economic government, you're going to end up with a political government, and you're going to end up with a superstate. These are very dangerous and destabilizing ideas, and for some reason it's all right for Angela Merkel to say that if you dismantle the euro, you'll put peace in danger. The real thing that puts peace in danger is dismantling our system of democratic nation states.
What proportion of Tory MPs do you think are privately, not publicly, privately in favour of coming out of the EU altogether? You guys must have thought.
I think it's probably quite similar to the country as a whole. I mean, we saw with a YouGov poll, 52% wants to come out, 31% staying. I think some of my colleagues hold, hopes for renegotiation and perhaps feel we might be able to get very large powers back to the UK. I'm not sure whether that will be possible. But I think the key people now agree on is the question of when we have a referendum and the wording of that.
Rather, the Tories want out, then you think?
I think a very large proportion now.
If part of the problem with being so closely involved with Europe is that we're financially responsible for their kind of economic mess, wouldn't we be responsible anyway as part of the IMF?
Well, that would be a much smaller proportion. And I voted against the increase in our monies to the IMF because I feared it would be used for these euro bailouts. I mean, I'd like to see a situation much more similar to that of Switzerland, which pays only a fifth as much proportionally into the EU as they would if they were full members. They have a web of bilateral arrangements with the EU, and they keep their self-government and their democracy. They export more to the EU than we are much better off. And I think we could be a much more freer, deregulated, stronger growing economy, trading with the whole world rather than just the EU, if only we got back our independence.
Is this issue alive and burning now? I mean, this vote came, it's gone, it was a backbench motion, it was following one of those sort of, polls on the kind of Downing Street website that people wanted it.
Well,
Has it gone?
No, I don't think it has gone, and I think it's symptomatic of a deeper problem. And the deeper problem is that all coalitions are fundamentally denials of democracy. And the reality is that we've got a situation where the Conservative Party is being run almost as if it's an exclusive coterie, and it's an exclusive coterie on the left of centre of the Conservative spectrum, allied with the Liberal Democrats, who are, I think, much more pleasant to associate with from the point of view of
You think David Cameron let me just get
Yes.
to the nub of this. You think David Cameron likes Nick Clegg more than you?
Definitely. And that's his privilege, but the only thing is that it does actually fly in the face of what Conservative voters like and of what Conservative MPs believe. And the reality of the matter is that there are people in the Conservative Party, some of them whisper it, some of them, like John Major, say it more openly, who actually would prefer to keep in coalition with the Liberal Democrats after the next election, even if the Conservatives won an overall majority, and that's the only way that the left of the party can get back into majority control.
Briefly, both of you, are there other issues where you feel this kind of sense of betrayal?
Definitely, and I've said this publicly many times. For many years I was the party's spokesman, a shadow defence minister dealing with the nuclear deterrent. When the coalition was set up, we were promised by David Cameron that the nuclear deterrent would have to be supported by the Liberals. When the announcement was made about defence, it was put off till after the next election. That was a total betrayal.
Mark Reckless,
And there's some things where I agree with the Liberal Democrats, for instance, in pushing powers down locally as much as we can. And say in policing, we say in the coalition agreement, there should be an elected individual, and the checks and balances should be provided by locally elected politicians. Yet at the moment, there's a plan to keep the Secretary of State monitoring everyone's budgets and potentially holding referendums on them. On the issue of Europe, Nick Clegg said in his manifesto that we should have an in-out referendum on our membership. And he says today in The Observer that the landscape in Europe is about to change. We can reach agreement with the Liberal Democrats. If it's on that issue, let the people decide in a referendum.
Okay, both of you, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Thanks so much.